We're back, we're live, we're here on a given Thursday morning. This is Hawaii, the state of health, the state of health care and the state of health, the state of the science of health. And our special guest today joins us from the mainland. He's Dr. Bill Miller. He's a physician and he's into infectious diseases, and he's going to help us understand infectious diseases in the 21st century. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be on.
Great to have you. So you wrote an article recently, and the article is about Zika, and it's about maybe things that people didn't know so well about Zika and how it is spreading and what it can do, and the phenomenon of Zika maybe as distinguished from other infectious diseases that we have seen in recent years. Can you give us a précis of your article?
My article starts with a premise that most people instinctively recoil from, which is this time it's different. Whenever people say that, they're almost always wrong. But Jay, this time things really are different. And let me explain exactly why. This is an old planet. And there have been infectious diseases on this planet forever. More particularly, we have as humans and every other organism on the planet has been in a compact and a balance with infectious disease for a really long period of time. Part of that balance is that the shifts tend to be low because species can migrate only at the rate of normal biological things. There's something different going on right now. We have a combination of two factors that amplify each other. One is a rapidly shifting climate, no matter the cause. We are in a period where the climate does simply seem to be shifting faster than it had over the last several decades or perhaps even hundreds of years. We add to that a very new and unique variable. Human beings travel at will, and they choose to do so with their companions and their pets. And they can go to every imaginable habitat, unlike any other species. So what's the difference is unusual rapidity of travel by a species that is unusually curious and is bringing with them all sorts of novel infectious agents to new environments. And when you put that together with a climate shift in which there's going to be the normal migration patterns of insect vectors like mosquitoes and ticks and infectious diseases, you have an amplification pattern, which is a new thing.
Mm-hmm. So, and the speed, so it's the climate change, it's the travel, and this results in what? More mosquitoes? Mosquitoes that are somehow different, mosquitoes that are more dangerous somehow. I mean, how does that work? It's not just that it's the warmer for them, but the additional temperature does something to them. Do you know what it does?
Here's what happens. Most infectious diseases that affect human beings and most other animals that we can look at with our eyes that are bigger than microbes are called zoonoses, Jay. Zoonoses is the fancy word for diseases that can skip between one host species to another. That's most infectious diseases, Zika being just one of the many. Ebola is another good example. Chikungunya is another. What we're doing, what we are capable of doing, is promoting the rapid shift of novel infectious diseases, not only old ones in old habitats to new habitats where they have not been before, where they can gain a new foothold, which is exactly what's happening with Zika. Or, in fact, there's information that suggests that there are an increasing number of novel infections for reasons that we don't quite understand yet. Let me give you an example. WHO indicates that in the last 50 years, there are 300 new infectious agents that they've been able to identify. Some of them may have been old, quiescent infections, affecting mainly small local populations. Zika is a good example of one of those. It only affected a tiny group of people until it exploded across the globe. Others might actually just be new infectious diseases. That's happening all the time. Most of these get introduced, they burn out by themselves, they never spread worldwide. But in an unusual circumstance that we're in, those infections that might normally just come and go, transient players on the Earth's surface, they have the potential for grabbing hold in a new and a different way. And that's why I think it's so important that we engage in a dialogue about this.
Yes. But it strikes me, though, that we're talking about the effects of climate change, not only on the mosquito, but on the organisms. And what I get from what you said is that the additional temperature, or whatever the effects of that are, that lends itself to the strengthening of an existing strain of disease like Zika. Might have been dormant, now it pops out, or for that matter, the creation of a new virus, because viruses are always mutating anyway, and so we might have different ones. We may have Zika #2, a Zika that has never been seen before, because of this additional temperature and other factors in the 21st century. Do I get it right?
Absolutely correct. It's not like this is new. These sorts of things have happened before. Travel has intersected with infectious disease and brought consequential epidemics. This is not a new effect. Let me give you a great example, bubonic plague. It is absolutely certain that bubonic plague existed well over 2,000 years ago in China. For some reason, there was a particularly large outbreak in the 1300s in China. That was at the moment when the Silk Route, the China route, the Silk Route was open. So traders brought that across land and by boat to the Caspian Sea, then the Black Sea. That went to Sicily. Sicily went to Italy. From there, it destroyed 1/3 of the European population. It took hundreds of years for Europe to recover. It was a pestilence of unbelievable horror.
Bubonic plague is a virus or a bacteria?
That's bacteria.
So, you always hear about these things that come from China. Why is it always coming from China?
Well, I don't know for sure. I can offer you information about SARS as a more recent example. 2002, 2003, the first that we knew about SARS, a severe acute respiratory syndrome. We don't know why that suddenly this zoonosis popped from one species to another. It is thought that it went from some exotic pet to humans. We don't really know exactly what it was, but I can tell you the consequences of SARS. It was substantial. 8,000 cases, 10% mortality. Hong Kong was shut down, Hong Kong airport was shut down for 3 weeks over this. These things are happening on a continual basis. There's nothing that's different about this, about the biologic processes that underline it. Those are probably immutable. Yeah. What is different, Jay, is that we can grease the skids in a most unusual and non-biological manner.
Yeah. You mentioned, I have 6 diseases written down. Maybe I missed 1 or 2. But the old ones, bubonic plague, for example, that did kill a lot of people. SARS, 10% mortality. Ebola, has had more than 10% mortality, as I recall. So we have some very dangerous, deadly diseases out there that have been a scourge in their time. But now Zika, it doesn't kill anybody.
No, that's not true. Zika is associated with a small number of deaths compared to the number of people infected. And you're very correct in pointing out that each of these diseases seems to have its own signature, its own profile of morbidity and mortality. But let's take an old disease, malaria.
Yeah.
A horrible scourge. It affects more than 100 million people a year. So does yellow fever. How many of those are killed? Millions. It's again, the absolute mortality rate may only be 3%, but if you're infecting 100 million people, that's highly consequential. Yes. Ebola affected only a few thousand, but the mortality rate was 90% plus. Each of these has its own specific manner of finding its susceptible host. It has its own reasons for doing what it does. And I'm saying it in this manner particularly, Jay, because the listeners may not understand that microbes make choices. I think most of us are conditioned. I know I went to medical school a long time ago. Microbes were just, they're stupid. They just went where conditions were ripe for them, as though they were inert. and simply blossomed like they were seeds that fell on fertile soil in lung compared to brain, for example. That's not true. What we've learned now, and this is vitally important, the microbial realm is cognitive. It makes its own choices. And that's what makes it so consequential. Bacteria are not stupid. They make decisions to improve their survival. And that's why they're difficult combatants.
That's a really profound thing in the sense that a bacteria, a little tiny wee bacteria, where's the brain? A virus, I mean, it's even a smaller structure than a bacteria. Where's the brain? And they work together, don't they? They work in large groups. They work over large populations. They work globally. How can they be so smart? What is it that makes them so smart to make those choices?
Jay, this is the most profound question, and you're really making me smile because no one ever asks this question but you, but I'm so interested in giving an answer. This happens to be an area that interests me deeply, and I write about quite a bit in peer-reviewed journals. You don't have to have a brain to be smart. That's the thing. And I want the listeners to understand me quite particularly. They're not thinking. Bacteria don't think. Viruses don't think. Not the way we do. They're not trying to decide how to hook up on Tinder, with the gal next door, or the guy next door. That's not thinking for them. But it would be a mistake to misapprehend that they can vitally use information to their own purposes. And their realm, and within their realm, their decision tree doesn't have to make any sense to us. They are making purposeful, they use information, they communicate abundantly, and they make decisions to try to reach preferential states. That's what living things do. It actually defines life. That's what living things do. That's why they are the permanent inhabitants of this planet. Very quickly, the planet is ancient, 4+ billion years old. We know that life, microbial life, began at the minimum 3.5 billion years ago, but possibly more. The organisms that we all can see with our eyes, Jay, you and I, we're multicellular organisms. The organisms we can see with our eyes, we're only about 550 million years old. We're the new life forms. We're the new kids on the block. But here's the critical thing that I think will make the listeners perhaps a bit uncomfortable. When I look in the mirror, I see Bill Miller. I expect I'm a unified being. I'm a singular thing. I'm Bill Miller. You're Jay. What else can you be? Well, that's not really a reality. Nature sees you as a vast collaboration of life. You are to a high degree microbial, as well as your own innate, your own personal cells. Now, what do I mean by that? When you do an actual counting of the numbers, and this is new information, in fact, very few physicians even understand this yet, but this is all absolute fact. The Human Microbiome Project has proved this. If you do the counting up of all the microorganisms that are in you and on you, they outnumber your personal cells 10 to 1. If you think only about the genetic fraction, all those genes and all those microbes, you add up all those genes, and then you compare them to your personal Bill J genes or my Bill Miller genes, outnumbered 100 to 1. My point is that we have learned now that we are an intimate, collaborative life form. Yeah. It's not what we see with our eyes. It's totally different. So what I'm getting at, Jay, is when I say that these diseases crop up and they leave and they overlap and they can insinuate, they're doing that because we're not just in the environment ourselves. We are part of that environment as a reciprocating, a layer upon layer of ecological series. That the cells, that microbe cells, when they work with my own personal cells, they're doing this in a localized ecology. My gut, we think of rainforests and we think of deserts. We understand ecology when we're looking at the outside world. Everyone gets that. You talk about the ecologies of the Hawaiian Islands, how varied they are, from the dry to the wet side. What we have not understood until this very present moment is that's what we are as organisms, and so is every other living organism we can see with our own eyes. They're all vast, linked ecologies of
We are all
cells.
connected. We are
They're
all connected with everything. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and I say to myself, I feel at peace with my biome. I feel at peace with all those parasites and, I don't know if it's parasite, but the bacteria and the other organisms that live in me in some sort of collaborative way. Right now, though, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Bill, I'm going to ask you whether we've mapped these not parasites, but bacteria and viruses, and whether the mapping can help us deal with them, understand their relationship with the human body, and understand how to beat their diseases. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Kaui Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here on Think Tech Hawaii every Friday at 3 p.m. We address issues of importance for those of us who live here on the most isolated landmass on the planet. Please come join me Fridays at 3 p.m. Mahalo.
Aloha, welcome to Think Tech Hawaii. My name is Josh Green. I'm the host of a program called Healthcare in Hawaii. I'm a physician. I work in the emergency department on the Big Island. I also serve in the state senate, which, please don't hold that against me, doesn't detract from my television program. We speak about all the big healthcare issues in the state. We get together on Tuesdays from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we try to talk about the most important issues in healthcare. This is a terrific venue for people to learn about healthcare. There are many programs on this station. We broadcast it later, not just on the internet, but also on OC16. Thanks for joining us. Please be informed healthcare consumers.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Dr. Bill Miller. He's a specialist in infectious diseases. We're talking about Zika and its delivery systems and exactly how these infectious diseases work in the 21st century. Really important for us to understand this. There's a lot of medical research going on, and there needs to be. So I was going to ask you, about these bacteria and viruses that we have been discussing, have identified. I mean, and the biome kind of affect the interrelationship, the interdependence between those things, all kinds of bacteria and viruses that help us live. We're collaborative animals. But the question is, we have mapped so many things for, genome and biome. Why haven't we mapped these things? Are we mapping? Should we map? If we do map them, will it help us deal with them?
Yes, we are mapping them, and it's essential that we do. There's a burst of progress now. One of the great advances is in a new science called metagenomics, another fancy term. All that the listeners need to know is that there are scientists who understand how to take a sample of an environment, like a thimble full of water or something like that, and they can analyze all of the DNA that's in there and identify the types, the strains, and the species of the different organisms that are there. This is enormously important, and here's why, Jay. When I went to medical school, we would say things like this. Your urine is sterile. Or we all knew for certain, absolutely certain, that a fetus in the womb was sterile. Amniotic fluid was sterile. It's all wrong. Nothing is sterile. The NASA space probes weren't. The celebrated NASA clean rooms, they really thought they were sterile. Here's why. When we were using culture techniques, which we thought were quite advanced, but that was our own hubris. They actually were as primitive as they could be. We were culturing way fewer than 10% of all the microbes that were present in the sample. So when we said it was sterile, we meant it was culture negative, not sterile.
Yeah.
That's enormously different.
Yeah.
So we're starting to know, and it's really termed dark matter. So your question was great. This is the dark matter of the microbial realm. It's equivalent to the dark matter that's in outer space. It's way more significant to us on a day-to-day basis because our relationship with the microbial world absolutely governs our lives. Let me tell you exactly how. Jay, if I had to, I could take out your spleen, sew you back up, and, well, if I did it, you wouldn't do too well. But if a skilled surgeon did it, you'd be fine. You'd live out the rest of your life just about as you would have normally. It really would have made very little difference to you. If we managed to figure out the means by which we could take out every microbe from your gut, you'd be dead in a day. it's another organ system. But and we're beginning to learn to think about the microbes in the gut as an organ system, but that's just because we're conditioned to understand it now. That is exactly the same thing for your respiratory tree, your oropharynx, your mouth. Every single spot, your skin is an organ itself. It's covered by microbes, every follicle, and we're going to learn about these associations, and then we're going to learn how to deal with the associations in the environment, just like you're talking about, to try to deliver us better health. Let me give you a discrete example from the news just a couple of days ago. Zika we're talking about, and so it's timely. The scientists have discovered that if they infect Zika with a bacterium, Wolbachia is the special name, but it doesn't matter. If this Zika virus is infected with a bacterium, then it doesn't, the mosquito, not the virus, the mosquito is infected that carries the Zika, is infected with the bacterium, then their rate of transmission of Zika plummets. They don't know why, but that does by about 90%. So again, as we learn these associations, we're going to learn new pathways of trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah. We had a show about, bacteria being introduced to a mosquito population. And what happens with this particular kind of bacteria is that it affects the mosquito's ability to reproduce. And so after a few generations, the mosquitoes are all dead. Very interesting phenomenon because, as you said, we live in an interdependent world. And so if you knock off particular, Egypta is the one that's doing Zika. If you knock off all that species of mosquito, you don't know the effect of the failure of that species on other elements in the world. Maybe certain kind of dragonflies like that mosquito, and then they fail, and then somebody likes dragonflies and they fail, and before you know it, it's a loop and it comes back to us. It's unpredictable exactly what would happen if we killed all the members of a given species of mosquito in order to save ourselves from Zika. It's really an interesting moment in science, the intersection of science and, research ethics, medical ethics, to decide what to do. Because if I guaranteed to you that we could kill all these mosquitoes in the world by this, this gene splicing technique, that's not necessarily a solution, is it?
No, that's terrific insight. We do not understand these ramifications yet. We're new to this. We still need to approach it with modesty, to admit our limitations of what we understand. This experiment with the infection of different kinds of insects and noting that they reproduce in a differential manner, it leads to infertility. This is incompatibility on an immunological basis. That experiment accidentally shows the major means by which evolution actually proceeds, which is the subject of my book, The Microcosm Within. Natural selection is very important, and it's not to be dismissed as a factor. However, what leads to most of the evolutionary changes that we see and is the exact cause of speciation is immunological incompatibilities that lead to reproductive isolation, reproductive separation of populations. So we don't have time to go through all this today, and it could be a separate interesting topic, but I want to reinforce that this proves that everything interconnects in ways that we're only beginning to understand. The common currency of biology on this planet is infectious disease, and I'm not overstating this case. It is infectious disease causes almost all of our disabilities, whether we're trained to recognize it or not. In the end, diabetes will prove to be an infectious disease. In the end, heart disease will prove to be an infectious disease. I don't mean that cholesterol couldn't be important, and I don't mean that that antigenic changes, what's called autoimmunity in diabetes, is not important. We're going to find that what incites those changes are changes in microbial populations or outright infectious events. There are epidemics, infectious disease, when we see them as pathogenesis, that is, we see them as disease-causing entities, they're working in another subtle manner on a geological time frame. That's evolution.
Yeah. Well, you know, I just wonder, I mean, at the end of the show, or toward the end, we have to get into what, if anything, can be done. But it just strikes me that we have to figure out where we're going to do it. I mean, we can deal, for example, with the mosquito, and we can kill or maim or modify the way the mosquito works. We can talk about the virus, and we can kill or maim or modify the way the virus works, or we can deal with the human. And we can see how his immune system is handshaking with that virus, and whether there's anything that we can do to change the way his immune system deals with that virus, and we can solve it there. So you have the carrier, you can affect the carrier, you have the virus or the bacteria itself, and then you have the human condition, which is the host, so to speak. So is there a medical preference there? Do we like one approach more than others, or do we like them all? Have we settled down on a way to deal with these diseases you're talking about that travel around the world?
That's a terrific question. The answer to that is, in medicine, the first dictum is to do no harm. That's, I think, should be our ecological point of view also. Try to protect human populations and do the least harm to the planet as a whole. Those are not contradictory goals. So if there is a means to protect humans from an infectious disease without having to destroy a mosquito population, then that's probably the right course of action, given the fact that every single one has its own difficulties. And I think that our human prejudice, and certainly mine as a physician and those whom I've trained with, is we'd like to affect changes at the local human level. So take polio as a perfect example. A polio vaccine was determined, smallpox is the same. We didn't really change the greater planetary environment one iota, other than to increase the probability of survival of human beings, which is our goal as physicians, as humanity wants other humanity to survive.
So we can we can do genomic research on the human. We can do gene splicing, a lot of work going on that. We can figure out how to make ourselves super people and resist these various diseases, and it's a fountain of youth, I suppose, if you can beat all the diseases.
Well, I don't know that we need to use gene splicing. That's one of those areas where I think it would be best to be modest. I'm a big believer in technology. I'm not one of those people that says, let's grind everything to a halt. But I do believe that aggressive researchers will push the envelope because they just cannot stop themselves. And I do think we have to be careful when we're editing genomes. I believe that, because I believe that infectious disease is the common currency, and infectious disease ultimately, through its ramifications, leads to evolutionary change. I would say let's be very careful how we tinker with genomes themselves. However, we can certainly learn a lot about antibodies, we can learn about vaccines, we can learn about treatments. We learned some things about Ebola. There's aggressive work on a vaccine on that, and on Zika too. So we can certainly do those things. I feel that it's very important that we approach climate change issues in a rational manner. And what do I mean by that? I know that there is strong disagreement among some people as to causes of climate change. But there are a great number of people who will say, I don't know whether humans are causing it or not, but I grant that the climate is shifting. Those things happen over geologic time. And by the way, there's no way to stop climate change if climate wants to change. It's happened since the beginning of Earth, which is over 4 billion years old. So if we're going to go ahead and spend money, and money is scarce, resources are scarce, let's direct that expenditure of money to that exact set of goals that will lead to the highest possible outcome, good outcome for humanity. If we talk about carbon sequestration and things like that, they might be decent ideas, but we have no idea whether they ever will deliver any positive effect. And we know that they'll be expensive, and we know a small group of people will get rich off it no matter. My suggestion is totally different. Let's husband our resources, and let's direct it towards the the end result that we should be fearing the most, rapid change of patterns of infectious disease for which we are yet unprepared. So here's what we could do. First and foremost, Ebola taught us a really important lesson, Jay. Do you recall the Ebola response that we mounted from the mainland? It was terrible. It was disastrous. It was too late, sorry, ill-prepared, ethically conflicted. We sent off 4,000 troops to Africa for nothing. They built hospitals that were never used. We exposed them to danger, and then their families on returning. It was nonsensical. But it did prove the need for a rapid, coordinated, worldwide response for something new. My premise in starting is that this is a new era because of global travel. Things can spread like wildfire. SARS, we were concerned about a worldwide epidemic in SARS like we had not seen since the 1918 influenza pandemic. So we should develop a narrow, well-trained, rapid reaction force, a lot like what we might do for the military if we were designing something like that. Doctors and nurses that are dedicated, trained, and ready to go on a moment's notice to do their very best to snuff out a new epidemic.
Hold it there, Bill. We're going to
Yeah.
take a short break. We're
Okay.
going to come back and we're going to get in detail about all of the elements of what that team would do, what governments would do, what the medical establishment would do in order to ameliorate the risk, which what I get is greater perhaps than we ever realized. That's Bill Miller. He's an expert in infectious diseases, a doctor. We're talking about healthcare in Hawaii and elsewhere. We're talking about infectious diseases in the 21st century. And we're having a wonderful discussion. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. We hear, and you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, which streams live on thinktechhawaii.com, uploads to youtube.com, and broadcasts on cable OC16 and Alelo 54. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Aloha, my name is Reg Baker, and I'm the host of Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. Business in Hawaii is a program that is positive stories about business in Hawaii. We're tired of hearing the negativity and why it's the wrong place to have a business. We talk about the positive reasons for having a business in Hawaii and how to be successful. We broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live with Dr. Bill Miller in Arizona. We join him with Skype, and we're delighted to talk to him about infectious diseases in the 21st century. So I was saying during the break, Bill, that we've had some very lethal diseases in human history. Now we're talking about this year we're talking about Zika and chikungunya and dengue. They've been around, but they seem to be more of a threat, and they seem to be different than some of those really lethal diseases. But they have a long-term effect, maybe a wider effect on the population, the global population. Am I wrong to notice this? Is this an evolution, a sea change of some kind? That we've solved the big ones, the really lethal ones. Now we have these more, difficult ones to solve.
A terrific question. The answer is that it's not a sea change on the basic biological processes, but we're in a phase, a cycle, in which this is the presentation that we have of a long arc of scourges. So my point is that what we're experiencing now, we've always experienced in the past. The spread of a deadly disease is always, from moment to moment, you always have thousands of diseases and their arcs overlap, but what can change abruptly for reasons that we do not have the skill set to know, and that's why I would like us to start to devote research dollars to this in a much more aggressive manner, is there can be subtle mutations that change the disease that is just an annoyance to a deadly pandemic. Let me give you a discrete example to put force behind the thought. I don't know that any of your listeners have possibly even heard of the 1918 influenza epidemic.
That was a really bad one, wasn't it?
Unbelievably bad. We simply couldn't wrap our minds around it. I know we don't have a lot of time, but your listeners should know that such a thing like this existed. So in the spring of 1918, this is during World War I, Europe has waged war for many years. The United States has just come in new, and it's training recruits. And it goes ahead and starts to collect young, healthy recruits from all around the country and aggregates them into Midwestern and then coastal places. And there was a small epidemic of seasonal flu, just like the seasonal flu that we experience right now in spring of 1918. Out of nowhere, a few months later, for reasons that still are unclear why, this became absolutely life-threatening with horrible mortality. People would get sick in the morning and they'd be dead by afternoon. They would drown in their own secretions in the space of 6 hours. There are vivid reports, first-person accounts written. Hospital in Philadelphia, for example, had a great author write a first-person account. People were dropping like flies. They couldn't keep up with the dead. Cities were closing down. Then it spread around the world. By the time it was done, it is estimated that 500 million people were infected worldwide and at least 50 million people were killed. Way more than in World War I itself, which was a horrible, terrible circumstance. So my point is this. If we're at a quiescent moment where Zika appears to affect the quality of our lives, but not our life expectancy, that may be true for now, but it doesn't mean it's true later. Chikungunya actually is associated with a wide range of disabilities, and it's a very unpleasant disease to have. It's like Lyme's disease, but a real bad, like on steroids, a real bad case of it, and you don't want to get it. Zika is inconsequential for the life expectancy of most people that get it, but tell that to the kids born with birth defects.
Sure.
Another example of what's called the protein, the ability to change out of nowhere, the protein nature of these infectious diseases. So this is a call to go ahead and marshal limited resources, because the spread of these infectious diseases is now faster than it ever had been in the past.
Because of these factors you pointed out.
Zika is a perfect example, real quick. 1947 is when it was first identified, a couple of cases only in Uganda. It kind of merged around into back and forth equatorial Africa for decades. Then it skipped to India, then Indonesia, and then there was a consequential outbreak in 2007-8 in Micronesia, all the way around the world, out of nowhere. It started to affect a lot of people. Then in 2015, it's in Brazil, South America, now Central America, all of the Caribbean, the United States, all the way up through Alaska, like wildfire. My point is that we are spreading it. The jump from Micronesia or French Polynesia to Brazil was a single traveler who was identified as the carrier. Mm-hmm. That's
all it takes.
It's all it takes in our modern world with planes. That's the difference.
So at this point in our show, I'd like to try to figure out what to do. Now, you mentioned that it would be a good idea to address climate change and try to ameliorate that. You mentioned that we ought to have teams, and I guess that would be a national team that would go on a fast response basis to a place, say, where Ebola was coming up in Africa, to respond to the first sign of some, epidemic. And I assume that's a federal initiative because you have to be global about it. But what about the individual? What about the states? What about the local communities? How do we minimize the risk? I mean, in this building, we're here in the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. They have those hand solutions. You can wash your hands and get all the germs off your hands, I suppose. I mean, what else can I do? What else can I do?
Rituals are comforting, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, I think you get the gist of my answer. I'll answer in as compact a way as I can, given the fact that we could really spend a great deal of time on it. At the federal level, you're quite correct. The coordinated training The first responder kind of initiative I'm talking about, that's actually international and federal. WHO, CDC, universities, trained military people, that because part of that's a quasi-military operation. We're talking about a ready reaction force of several thousand people that could instantly go to a place like an Ebola afflicted area, get that place quarantined, get it cleaned up. The second line is also generally national, but involves individual contributions. Also, that's vaccines and treatments. That's done at multiple levels, both internationally and United States, and that's local. Now, the local control at state level and city level, that's vector control. And what do I mean by that? In some communities, it would mean passing out mosquito nets. It's really inexpensive. In others, and this is beginning to happen even here in Arizona, remediating standing water, teaching local residents. Our city is actually sending out flyers saying, if you've got tires in the yard, remove them. This is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. We're not a big mosquito area here, but we're worried that the Zika mosquito will travel this far north. It's not a hospitable locale, but it could happen, and the mosquito could change and make it happen. Climate change could also help it happen. I think the last thing that the government can also fund research to look at the reproductive cycle of vectors. We've talked about that before. That has to be considered carefully, but is certainly one aspect that must be considered. And then lastly, this is at every level, from top to bottom, including the individual, an appeal for us to be careful with how we use antibiotics. I don't want any listener to be mistaken. I think antibiotics are wonder drugs. It's one of the great medical inventions, one of the great inventions of all human history. But we have developed a relationship with it that leads to misuse and abuse. There are two reasons for it. As a physician, you're taught that you should never use an antibiotic unless you think it will be effective. But in the era that I was taught, don't give it, it's not a good idea, but it doesn't really do any harm. That's wrong. Antibiotics should be used when they can be used purposefully and well. Patients become a very strong lobby to receive antibiotics because they're absolutely convinced that whatever infection they have will go away if they get an antibiotic. Well, naturally, they should feel that way, because if they take the antibiotic and the antibiotic works, the infection goes away. And if they take the antibiotic and it didn't do a thing for the infection, most times the infection goes away anyway. The viral infection, the cold, the flu, it's going to go away on its own over time. Either way, they become convinced that the antibiotics did it. But the problem is this: I explained to you that we're this collaborative form of life. We need the good microbes to be in balance with us. We're a very exquisitely balanced organism. We know for certain that there are nuanced complications to our own lives, and if we're a pregnant mother and other things, there are ramifications. I keep on using that word, but that's because things reverberate back and forth across the generations. So antibiotics use is a cooperative, limited and cooperative enterprise between concerned physicians and worried patients. Patients have to stop automatically insisting that they should get an antibiotic from the physician. At least be willing to accept the advice that you don't need it if the physician willingly gives that to you. Yeah. And lastly, we do need to get these antibiotics out of our food supply.
Yeah, great point. One last thing is that, in terms of reaching that balance between, our biomes and all those collaborative organisms that we need to survive. You mentioned, research. Does the research, do you think, does it include that? Does it include the genetic examination of those things? And it's not antibiotics, but maybe some other drugs that would help put us in balance on that level. Is that happening? Should that happen? Would you fund that?
Yes, there could be drugs, but here's the interesting thing. It may be that what they do is actually treat you with a specific bacteria that counteracts the imbalance. I know this sounds like a stretch to your listeners, but I can tell you right now, these are treatments that are in active work. For example, inflammatory bowel disease, they bring the colon bacterial, it's called the flora the microflora back into balance, and many, many patients have remarkable improvement. We're just beginning to explore these interstices, this networking. And it's exciting, Jay, because here's why. This is the next big wave of medicine. This understanding that we have misidentified our true natures, and that we need to learn about this exquisite balance, will bring a new wave of improved health, generalized better life expectancy across this planet. It's a terrific time to be alive.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing, Bill. It's a great time to be alive, and the important thing is to stay alive. So you can enjoy a great time to be alive. That's Dr. Bill Miller. He's an expert, a specialist in infectious diseases. We joined him in Arizona by Skype here on Healthcare in Hawaii. And we talked about infectious disease in the 21st century. Really a lot of eye-opening points. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thanks very much. If anybody is interested, I encourage them to go to my book, The Microcosm Within, or an interesting Twitter feed, @BillMillerMD. I think they'd find a lot of interesting information there.
Thank you, Bill. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.